Okay, look, hear me out, okay? This is a tutorial video. You like tutorial videos, and specifically it's about control nodes, which are really confusing. So I'm going to just explain control nodes in pretty much as much excruciating detail as I can, so that way I just have it there, and also it's good because I don't really understand it either. So this is a good excuse for me to figure it out. So basically, control nodes are super useful for pretty much anything that is to do with GUIs, so things like menus, HUDs, like health bars if you have, or whatever, anything really menu-like. So I guess the first thing to do is to start with the base node, which is just named control, and I'll mention a little bit about how it's different from the much more straightforward node 2D. So node 2Ds, if I just make one right here, have a category called transform, which holds all of the data for, well, where it's positioned. So that's how it's rotated, how it's scaled, and where it is. It's pretty simple, pretty nice to use. Control nodes, it's pretty much the same, except they have a different category called rect, which is literally a rect 2D type, or just a rect type, as you can program, which holds a position, it holds a rotation and a scale, but it also has this other stuff. It has minimum size, it has size, which is pretty crazy in itself, pivot offset, clip content. So that's kind of a bunch of crazy stuff, and the reason for that is because Node 2D is effectively a marker for drawing 2D graphics. It's a control node is like an organizational thing for UI elements, so actually it's a box. All control nodes are actually rectangles. They're all boxes. I mean, you might see a Node 2D and it has this kind of thing going on, but this isn't a box. This is a point. This is a point which happens to reside at this position, and it's just scaled this way. This box is just a representation of the scale. This is not a real box. This control node, this is a real box. This starts up here, and it's got this size, it's got this many X pixels, it's got this many Y pixels. This is a real box. Yeah, it's also worth mentioning just offhand that you can't actually position control nodes at fractional positions. So you'll notice that I've just moved this around like crazy, and this size thing in the corner doesn't actually go into decimals. It stays as whole numbers. And I don't really know why that is. Well, especially considering this one, I mean, I can move it all over the place, and yeah, that's a pretty crazy... there's all sorts of decimals going on there. Let me just delete that. I don't really know why that's the case, but that is the case, so I guess I'll just have to deal with it. It's really not much of a problem, just as long as you're aware of that, because that has tripped me up a few times. So let's get straight into the really scary stuff, which kind of is what prompted me to even make this video, which is anchors and margins. So basically, this whole system ensures that no matter how big your screen is, so if you're developing for mobile devices with like 1,000 different screen sizes, or if you just want to, make sure everything looks consistent on different screen sizes, that graphics or menu elements will always be in the correct positions. So anchors specifically do this by anchoring a control node to its parent object. If the control node is the tree root like it is here, then the parent should be the viewport, and that's a bit confusing, but basically you can think of the viewport as a big rectangle, which is just this size. It's just this big box thing here. So I run this. Yes, I'll save it. Then this whole thing is the viewport, this whole thing is the parent, which will be anchored against. So let's get into the anchor properties. That explanation might have confused you, so if it did, just keep going, because it gets a little bit less confusing in a minute. So there are 4 properties basically. There's left, top, right, and bottom, and each of these refer to edges of this rect. Relative to the parent. So they all take in values from 0 to 1, which basically represent what proportion along the parent rect size to put each edge. So this is a bit confusing, especially when you first hear it. So this is relative to the top left corner. So if you wanted your control node to always stay in the top left, then I would keep this to... I'll put this to 0 just for now. You can see this... left is 0 and top is 0. If I wanted it to be maybe 1% away from the top boundary, then I'd add a 1 here. And So basically, I just had a little bit of confusion there, so I am back, and now I fixed everything. So the reason that I was getting some pretty unpredictable results was because this margin thing was being set all over the place, and I was moving it around just now, so don't worry about that. But, and as I said, we're back now, keeping this margin just to these values for now. I'll explain those in a minute. But yes, so anchor, if I wanted this to be 0%, if I wanted this left edge to be 0% away from the left-hand side of the screen, this would be 0. If I wanted it to be 0% away from the top, this would be top. However, if I actually add this, you can see, the more I add this, if I put this to 0.1, and I make sure these are constant, because they change all over the place, then you can see this is about 10% away from this side of the screen. And I'm going to do something here. I'm going to put a label, and I'm just going to say, hey. And this is going to basically just represent that. So if I open up this viewport, this is anchored to the parent node, which is a viewport. So if I change the screen size, this still is about 10% along the screen. If I make it really wide, it's still about 10% along the screen. And it'll be consistent for that, so I can keep going with that. I don't think this needs to be anything, or maybe it does, I don't really understand. But the point is that, yeah, this is fine. Don't worry about these margin values, just they're confusing and strange. I'll keep these to be about 0, 0, and 40 and stuff. But yeah, either way, it's not that bad. So if I wanted to make, for example, well, actually there's this layout thing up here, so if I wanted to center this control node, I'd go up here to layout and press center, and you can see what this has actually done is set the anchors all to 0.5, and the reason for this is because it actually wants this left edge to be 0.5 away from the screen, this top edge to be 0.5 away, this right edge and the bottom edge to all be 0.5 away from where it is. So that's actually centering it in this little point here. And so that's pretty useful in itself. And right now things are still a bit confusing because I haven't explained margin, which is kind of important to really get into it. So basically margin is offset, and this is absolute, I should say. So this doesn't change whether your screen is big or small or anything. This is absolute. So if you want to offset your shape by a factor of 100 in the x-axis, you have to move the left and right values. Well, you can set them to 100, or you can add 100 to them, and it'll move those edges away from the left-hand side of the screen by that amount. So I can do that right here. If I add 100 to this, well, let's not actually add 100 to this. Let's set both these to 0 and 40 respectively, just to make the addition easy. I'll set this one to 100, and when I press enter, some crazy stuff is going to happen. It's going to go like that. But if I add 100 to them both, you can see it's the same size, it's just moved along by 100. And that's because this is anchored to the center point, but the margin, this is actually moved, this left part has actually moved 100 away from the left side. And the same for the right, really. This is relative to the top left corner, so the right is going to be, if that's 140, that's going to be, well, right now it's just squished, because, shapes. But the point is, it's still moving away from the center point. And I can do this for the top, too. If I wanted to move the top down by 100, and the bottom down by 100, I'd move them like this. And this would keep them anchored to this point. However, these 2 points would always move together, sort of like in a group. If I just do 2 labels just to show what I'm talking about, I'll just type anchor. Let's see. We actually do these properly. So this like that, or I should really call this one anchor point, and I'll call this one margin. And this should sort of represent what's going on here. And this has got a space in it, which again is not really what you want. But so yeah, you can see if I just reset all of this stuff, because this control node here does not really need any of this at the moment. I'm just gonna redefine all this stuff. So just bear with me. Okay, cool. So I'll move this down. I'll center this using this lovely hotkey up here, and I'll put it down towards the center of the screen. Or actually, I should make this control node the size of the screen, because again, it's all relative to the parent object. So if I make this whole control node the size of the screen, I should be able to set this stuff pretty much towards the center. This margin values are a bit confusing, but the point is, and what I'm getting at here is that these margin values are offset, and this is always going to be tied to this is getting kind of confusing, and I'm stumbling over my words a lot, but this margin label here is anchored at 0 to this, which means that it's basically on top of this. If it didn't have any of this margin, it would be on top of this anchor, okay? But this anchor, this is anchored to the center of the parent, which is this huge box. So this anchor will always move proportionally to the center of the control node. This will move proportionally to the center, but it'll always be offset. So if I show you how this looks in a big window, this isn't quite what I wanted. So what I'm going to do is move this up like this. I'm going to change this to a label because I am stupid, and I did not quite realize that this would actually not work anywhere near what I actually wanted. So these are still stuck together. So let me center this one. I'll move this one way back in. Okay, same thing I just said, but this time it'll work. So if I move these, you can see as the viewport shrinks, this anchor bit is always in the center, even if I get really small. However, this is in the center, but it's offset slightly. And that's pretty much it. You can see it's always relative to the center. It's always got this bit, and that's useful for some elements. So I guess that's kind of the scariest bit explained. If you still don't get it, which I couldn't really blame you for, just like send a comment or something. I'll explain it better, or look at the text version, because I had a lovely text version, but I deviated from it too much, and maybe that was detrimental. But anyway, now onto another fairly scary bit, which is grow directions. So I won't get too much into this, I guess. Basically, this is to do with the direction that your control node is expected to grow. If you set both the horizontal property and the or if you set both the horizontal property and the vertical property to begin, which it actually is not at the moment. So if I set that to begin, you might notice that when you attempt to adjust the right margin, this one specifically, it stops changing in size once it gets to whatever its minimum size is, which in this case is just a flat line. Or I guess it wouldn't be that because there's text in the way. But let's try that. So you can see the right margin, it grows, but it actually, when it tries to get smaller than that, it just starts moving, which is kind of confusing. This left margin sort of similar, but when it goes, it'll start going like that, but it'll just hit a brick wall. The right margin will kind of go like that, and I don't really understand this. But this is because the control node is kind of ready to just start growing from the left hand side if you start this. So you could think in this in terms of a label that's holding text. If you start typing, it should kind of expand towards the right hand, or towards the right hand side. I think I've messed this up. I think this should be N, shouldn't it? So yeah. So you can see here, if I put this back a bit, oh god, I've messed all this up. Okay, you can see it actually starts going like that, and if it gets below this certain bit, it'll just stop. On the other hand, this has got all sorts of crazy behavior. I don't really... Yikes, that's kind of scary. So I don't entirely understand that, so I guess my advice to you is just leave this to default, because otherwise demons and evil spirits will haunt you, either until you die, or maybe until you stop worrying about grow directions, because they are literally sent from hell. So this is something which is pretty awesome, and not as terrifying as the previous stuff, which is this lovely focus section. And finally, it's something which doesn't make me hate everything. So this is kind of to do with, like, if you want to press the tab key, or you want to use the keyboard or a gamepad to navigate menus, that kind of thing. So let me just make this back into a standard control node, and I'll add a bunch of tool buttons. Let me just do that, and this should be fine. So I'll make all of these text, call them all button, and maybe just make them easier to do this, I'll put them into a VBox. And all this does is organize these things vertically. I'm not going to get into this right now. Don't worry about it. This isn't essential to understanding. So usually Godot is pretty good at figuring out how to do this. So if I select this and I use the arrow keys, it will automatically go up and down. If I press enter, it would click the button, but it doesn't do anything right now. But yeah, usually it's pretty good. But sometimes, especially if I were to take these out of a VBox, and I were to maybe offset some of these a little bit, so a bit like this maybe, this is where it kind of confuses Godot. If you have two that are kind of overlapping especially, so this is going to work perfectly now, isn't it? No, okay. So you can't actually access that bottom one. Even though it is below, it's kind of, it won't go there. So, the way to fix this is to use this focus category down here. So you can see if there's a bunch of things, there's neighbors, or what they're called. So basically, neighbor left is the button to go to if you press the left button on the D-pad or the left arrow key, or top, same but with the top arrow key or the up arrow key or the up on the D-pad, right bottom, basically the same idea. So for this one, I want to, when the player presses down, I want to continue going to tool button 5. And that's it. Go to button, I set the node path, it points to this one. That's easy enough. I can set next, which should do the same thing but for the tab key. So if I was selecting this one, I press tab, it would go to the next button, which in this case would just be the tool button 5. And the same for this one, so it can get back up, I'll do top, I'll assign tool button 4. And previous, assign tool button 4. And now when I launch it, I should be able to click on the bottom, or the top one, I'll go down, 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 because now it understands. I can go back and forth between these, everything is lovely, the world is a beautiful place. And that works really well. And this means you could, if you really wanted to, you could do some really confusing, crazy stuff. I don't really advise doing this. I mean, it's pretty crazy, dude. You could assign all this crazy stuff like that, just make no sense about it. You go down, down, oh, that brings you back up to the top. What happens if I press up? It goes down to button 4. And it's all a mess. It's all a big mess. But you could do that if you really wanted to. I don't know, I'm not your boss. I can't tell you what to do. So yeah, that's pretty sick. It's a really intuitive way to set up keyboard controls for menu systems. I didn't know it existed, but now that I do know it exists, I need to use it like so much. Like this fixes pretty much all of my problems with trying to set up menu stuff. I was so happy when I found this out. So yeah, now this is the mouse bit, which is honestly, like, this is even simpler. There are only two properties here, and this basically, well, the top bit describes how the control node handles the mouse cursor interacting with it. So imagine you have, let's say, these two buttons on top of each other. So let's call this one button on top, and I'll just move this one down on top of this one. And you know, this means that this one on top here will completely block the other one underneath. So if I were to click on this, it would only actually select this one usually, though I think it's got some exception. The Godot is trying to be clever, but yeah, usually this would completely block the bottom one, or whatever, or I think it's because this one's above it in the rendering order. So now it should completely block it, and there's no way to actually click on this one behind it, because you can see this. If I go down to filter is set to stop. So I could, right now I think pass is bugged because it doesn't seem to work, so I'm not going to do that one. But ignore will actually, you can set this and it'll stop taking in any button input, and it will actually allow you just to click the one underneath. And that's pretty cool. So that means that this one won't receive any mouse events. So as far as I'm aware, this one, the mouse is just completely invisible to this one on top. I can click any of the others, but this one on top is not doing anything. This one here, I can click it, it's responding to the click, it's being focused. So yeah, that's pretty good. As far as what pass is meant to do is to get the mouse event on top, but also pass it to the one below. But it doesn't seem to do that at the moment. As I said, I think it's bugged. I've seen some bug reports So just keep that in mind. It'll probably be fixed in the future if you're like 6 months on watching this video. Hello, 6 months in the future. This probably works now. You can use it. That's what it does. But yeah, as I said, until then, whatever. So I'm going to keep this a stop for now. I'm going to talk about the default cursor one, which is just awesome. It's just, look at all these buttons, you know? You have so much stuff here. You want to do secondary diagonal resize? Well, I can do that. You roll over it, boom, diagonal resize, in case you wanted that. I can do help. Do you want your mouse cursor to get extra confused when it looks at the button? Well, here we go. Boop. It's so confused right now. It has no idea what's going on. I'm going to stop that. But yeah, that's easy enough. So yeah, now for the size flags, and these are horribly buggy. So also 6 months in the future. Hi, this is nightmares. This is just nightmares. So I'll make a box container. Let's see. Oh, I think I have to make a HBox container. I'll do a VBox container because I used that one earlier. I'll put all of these into the VBox container, and the thing I'm going to explain here is the size flags. So you might notice that somewhere here are size flags, and there's all these crazy options and properties, and some of them are exclusive and some of them are not, and I don't know why. So basically, if you want your VBox to be like this big, and you want these buttons to take up all of the space, you select all of them. You go to size flags, you do horizontal expand, vertical expand, and it does it, okay? For some reason, it expands horizontally but not vertically by default, and I don't know why that is, but whatever, okay? But sometimes if you enable expand once and then disable it and then disable fill and then re-enable fill, it'll also expand the node to fill up as much space as possible. So if I enable it, then disable it, then disable fill, then re-enable fill. So these are the exact same things as before, but for some reason it's still filling. I don't understand, okay? I really don't understand. You can also use shrink center, which will sometimes center the nodes in the grid container, as long as expand is not on, and I don't think it needs to fill. I think that's bad. I said both these to shrink center. Well, as you can see here, it's doing shrink center in the horizontal axis, but not in vertical. Why is that? I don't know. You have to do expand and shrink center for this one. I guess it's just up to whatever the nodes are feeling like. If you catch the nodes on a bad day, then they just won't do it. It's really confusing. I know that explanation was really bad and not what you're looking for in a tutorial, but here's my legitimate advice to you, is that press the buttons randomly until you get what you want. They're not that important to understand. I mean, there's only so many things you really want to do with them. There's not many options here. There's a lot of buttons, but there's not many options, and they're really buggy. If you have a better understanding of these, let me know, but I'm pretty sure they're just weird and bugged. Styles are completely useless. Let me just tell you that. There's no good reason to use styles. There's a reason like they haven't been updated in ages, is because like nobody uses them. I don't understand them. I used them once, but it wasn't really worthwhile. They were kind of buggy. But it's just easier to manually make them in a sprite editor, to be quite honest. They're just... Have you seen this? Like, this is basically what it is. You have this style stuff, and you can make a new theme, you can add an item. I don't like it, whatever. The point is, that's pretty much it. That's the essential components of control nodes. The important bit was like the anchor and march and stuff, and the focus stuff, and the neighboring stuff. So I guess I'll get into more specific instances of control nodes. I guess I'll start from the top, which would be like the pop-up nodes. I don't know. I mean, thanks for watching, and stay tuned for part 2 in this series I'm apparently doing now, which would be, again, about pop-up nodes. Goodbye.